And hello, and a pleasant good evening to one and all, and welcome to another episode of Fathers Knows Best. It's an initiative of the Parent Teachers Association of the Anakin High School, and they are working in collaboration with yours truly, your program, A Few Good Men. All right, we already have our guests in the back end, and we'll just take the opportunity to invite the president of the PTA before we introduce our guest and also introduce the topic. So, just bringing on our president, the president actually of the Parents Association of the Anakin High School. Monty, how are you?
Good day, Colin. How are you doing? I
Not
was
bad at
just
all.
let me just come on and take this opportunity right off the bat to say a happy Sunday to everyone outside there. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today, and even a special thanks to our two guests that's coming on today, who are experts in the issue that we decide to discuss today. All right, that we advertised it last week. So I want to say thanks to you, thanks to the parents, and thanks to all the fathers, thanks to the executive, and thanks to a few good men. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion today.
All right.
Yeah.
So before we begin, maybe we could just flesh out the topic so we get some context. So
Yeah.
just tell us. We talk about missing teens, and I know it's very frequent that we've seen reports of missing teens,
Yeah.
especially young girls, popping up on social media. So just introduce the topic so we put some context to the discussion.
Yes, so it was an observation of ours, right? And considering that I am the president of the PT of an all-girls school, which is the Anglican High School, we thought this was a pertinent discussion to have because over the holidays and the Christmas season, we did see quite a bit of that popping up on social media, young people missing or whatever the case may be. And whereas we always frequently see this happening, we never really, sometimes we hear the announcement on the radio. Sometimes we don't know, sometimes we may see hear they were found. We don't know where they were found, what are the circumstances, if there is legal implications to this, and if they were in harm's way. And also, from as I said, we are a female school. um is there a reason behind too? Why is it that you always have, mostly you always hear young ladies missing? I know teenagers, when you there's no sex when it comes to that of troubled teens, you understand? And is it therefore because of you have the propensity for females to do certain things unlike males or whatever the case may be? So all that could be part of the discussion,
Hmm.
right? And and as a whole, because we may be zeroing in on the missing teens, but there could be other behavior that comes along with this, that even that we could dive into and have that discussion.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So so I think it's time we introduce our guests. And, they're already in the back end, and I will first bring on the former president actually of the Grenada Bar Association, Mr. Ruggles Ferguson. He's an attorney at law, and he is one of the experts that we've invited to this program. So we'd like to take the opportunity to bring him on and to welcome him to A Few Good Men again for the second time. Mr. Ferguson, unmute your mic.
Yes, thank you, Colin. Thank you for inviting me, and I hope you are hearing me clearly.
Yes, we are.
Yes, yes,
Are
yes.
you
Yeah.
able to hear me clearly?
Yes, yes, we
Yes,
are.
we are.
Yes.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
All right. Happy New Year to you, sir.
Yes, and let me commend the organizers and yourself for hosting such an important program. And in order to change society, we need people's involvement at different levels. We need strong institutions. And the fact that you are having a program of this nature, I think, is important. And it's outside of any state or governmental structure. And it
All right.
shows what can be done when, as you say, good men take up the mantle and
Yeah.
try to change society.
All right. Thank you so much. And our next guest, we would welcome to the platform for the first time, but she's no stranger to myself or to Mr. Greenwich. We'd like to invite Miss Shawna Thomas Cuffie. She is a school counselor with the Ministry of Education. So we just like to bring her onto the platform. Happy New Year to you, Miss Cuffie.
Happy New Year, Colin.
All right.
Happy New Year, Mr. Greenwich. Happy New Year, Mr. Ferguson. It's great to be
Happy
here.
New
Yes,
All
same
right.
to you.
Wonderfully.
Thanks,
I
thanks,
love
and
your
same
smile.
to you.
I love your smile today. You have a nice smile today.
Everybody loves this smile. Oh, Lord. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
All right. So I would open up my first question to you, Miss Kofi. As we bring in the discussion, what we really like to get from your perspective, as we've just spoken here on the numerous reports we've seen of missing teenagers, mostly girls, on
Yes.
social media. You
Mm-hmm.
know, as a school counselor, I'm sure you've had experience in dealing with matters surrounding those situations. In your perspective, what are some of the reasons to explain the frequency of those reports, or these reports actually, and maybe if you can tell us the age groups that are involved in some of those reports, that would be helpful as well.
So let's start with the age groups. Um, Generally, for the missing teens here on island, we have from about 10, okay, to
Wow.
17, from 10 to 17. And understanding the developmental milestones and the developmental psychology with students, you would know that 10 is prepubescent, so that's very early. When you have a 10-year-old running away, a 10-year-old, you cannot account for a 10-year-old. You have certain questions happening in mind, right? Who's monitoring? Who are the key caregivers in that child's family? What really happened for the child to go missing? Is the child really missing? So, some key things we need to understand now. The dynamics of family has changed, the structure of family also has changed. You have children now telling you, I have two mommies, yeah? Or, yes, so there's a lot of change in the structure. You also have co-parenting, and when you have co-parenting, it shows that there's some blended family dynamics as well, right? Some of our children are a part of divorce custodial challenges, and Mr. Ferguson can speak more to that. But in my experience, when you have feuding parents where custodial issues have not been finalized, you have the children too taking on that burden, and that level of psychological duress can cause them to flee the coop, whichever one they're in, depending on the weekend. You have some children who have every other weekend with a parent or so, and that can be very taxing on a child. I remember years ago, I dealt with a case where the child had two sets of books, two sets of clothes, two sets of everything. And the then principal, had to say to the parents, no, 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 no. We're going to stop this now and here. Enough confusion in this family, right? It's either the books stay here or you have one set, because they weren't even realizing that it was a taxing psychological thing for two sets of everything, just so that they won't have to interface or communicate with each other. So some of the reasons, right, for children going missing are you have family conflict, which I expressly stated. Some teens want to become independent, so they don't want to have to answer to anybody, so they just bolt. Then some of them are victims of crimes, okay? We have to be careful with that. I can explore that a little bit more. Some of them, they go places without permission and they don't tell anybody where they're going. So that comes now with care and monitoring. Then, of course, some of our students have some serious mental health challenges. Yeah? Some abuse alcohol and drugs very early. And then, of course, with that comes some abuse and neglect. So these are some main reasons why they go missing.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Ferguson, I would like to just bring you in here. You have any comments with regards to what was just said?
Is that for me, Colin?
Oh yes, yes, Mr. Ferguson. Sorry about that. But
Oh,
yes, I
okay.
would just like to get your just opening remarks regarding the conversation.
Well, yes, certainly. As Ms. Cuffie highlighted again some of those reasons, and I'm happy she raised the issue of mental health and closely linked at times to drug and alcohol abuse, and the fact that you know our children, based on the fact that they are children, they need special care and protection. We have issues, serious issues with mental health in the country at different levels, and we have no serious legislation in place to address mental health. In fact, the legislation we have right now to deal with mental health is the Mental Hospitals Act of 1885 that refers to patients basically as lunatics. The short title of that act speaks to an act to deal with lunatics. There is some mental health new legislation that was drafted with PAHO's involvement more than 10 years ago and submitted. I actually was involved in the consultation aspect of it at the earlier period with the crafting of it, and later with consultations throughout the country. And again, nothing has happened substantially, if at all, since then. So, what is important? We identify the problem, and at times we lay blame on the children themselves. We see them as bad children, and we blame parents. It's a whole blame game that's taking place, and we have to recognize that as a society, we have to ensure that our children are well protected. I would just, by way of opening, say in relation to the law and the approach, certainly in Grenada, to child issues and care and protection, it comes, starting point really is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was the earlier one, but the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is an 1989 convention that Grenada has ratified. And by ratifying it, Grenada has certain obligations, is a state party, and Grenada has certain duties to ensure that children are protected the way that they ought to be. And coming out of that, you would hear, for example, of one of the key pieces of legislation that we have is the Child Protection Act. The earlier act actually was 2001, and we have a later act, well, the current act, 2010. One of the issues with children and dealing with the issues of children connected to this issue of missing teenagers is the question of the age. We have, for example, the age of consent under the criminal law, and that is consent for sex, for example. The age of consent is 16. Under the Juvenile Act, we have the age that deals with children involved in offenses, conflict with the law. The age is 18. Under the Child Protection Act, the Child Protection Act defines a child as someone who is under 18 years of age. So you have these different ages and age groups. Now we have the age of majority moved several years ago by a 2012 act, is 18 years, the age of majority. You can vote at age 18. So there are issues, especially when teenagers go missing, and as Ms. Cuffie said, it might be missing because they have, well, run away, as some people put it, or may be missing because they are abused and depend on certain people for care, for financial support, financial and other support, or they may run away because of an abusive situation at home. So it's important to be able to deal with these issues frontally. And one of the issues too is if your age of consent is 16, and as Ms. Coffey indicated, the ages of these teenagers between 10 and 17 years, and you go by some guy, then you can't be charged. That person can't be charged criminally for any issues of sexual relations or intercourse, and you have those examples. But then you have the Child Protection Act that enables the state to step in and protect children under the age of 18. So there might be a civil way to deal with it under the civil law, but not necessarily under the criminal law. Under the criminal law, of course, if the child is under 16 and you have them running away or going to some adult, by some adult, and there may be issues there where the adult can be charged if there is evidence of sexual intercourse or sexual relations with that particular child. So maybe I should stop here, and you can, by way of my own introductory remarks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Eddie, I'm sure, as a father yourself, you've had some questions in your mind as to regarding the topic. So, and this is an open discussion. Like I said, anyone can feel free to chime in at any point in support of,
Right. So what I would like to address after listening to Miss Cuffie and Mr. Ferguson, right? Because there are certain points that they both made that, I think captures, in the case of Miss Cuffie, I think whether it is the family structure, whether it is the blended family, or whether it is abuse, I think what I am taking away from this is that it speaks to the discussion and the conditions in the family, right? And when I say conditions in the family, whether it is, I would think as a parent, we all strive to give our children the best conditions possible for them to thrive and for them to become the best versions of themselves, right? But if it is that we have these upsurges in missing teens, whether it is female, and maybe we could speak to that, why females more than males, right? If we keep having these things, whether the reasons being abuse, or whether the reasons being blended family, or whatever the key, or you have, I think she gave an example where they had two families, well, two homes having duplicates, or whatever the case may be, right? How does that work to the benefit of our children, right? And do we as a people, as a country, need to revisit what it is that we are what it is we're selling to parents as a society, whether it is, because, and maybe Ms. Coffee could tell me, it is my observation, right, that I think Grenada and maybe to some extent the Caribbean, we are somewhat dominated now by what we call single parent households, right? It's just my social interaction. That's my observation. I don't have any particular data to back that up, right? I know Mr. Ferguson speak to that of, okay, well, you don't want to blame anyone, or you blame the parents, or you blame the child, or whatever the case may be. What I'm really trying to capture here is that we need to revisit, right, what it is that the system of parenting, or the type of parenting we really practice in the Caribbean, or in Grenada as a whole. That's one of the things I really would like to hear some feedback on, because we had a contributor, and maybe just to give you some context, we had a contributor up to last week, and we were speaking to that of, because of Grenada, we have other cultures coming in. And one of the teacher that was on the panel was saying, he said, one of the things he recognizes that as a teacher for how many years, we have a no Muslim community. And he said, I've never seen one of them in the office for disciplinary issues. I've never seen them, and a whole line of things, right? And it's, when you look at it, is that they have a different way of parenting and a different structure, right? So if the underlying issue, right, of whether it is missing teenagers or even other issues, right, truancy or whatever the case may be, it boils down to that of the conditions in the home, the conditions of parenting, and so. I just would just like to have maybe some feedback as what you all think, whether it's concerned, whether it's something we need to visit as still our form of parenting, whether it's the nuclear family, whether it's the single parent family, or whatever it is. Yeah.
So just to give some context, psychologically and social wise on your concerns, and these are credible
Yeah.
concerns, and it guides the discussion, and it guides it very well, right? We've never been without families who are never headed by one household. When you look as far back historically, slavery, right? We are people of African ancestry, most of us. Well, I'm mixed up as what? Everybody's mixed up, but that's what we carry. And even then, our families were very much no longer families. So we've had 200 years of displacement, right? And we must not forget that we have this displacement. And I think it was Dr. Nicole Philip Dow who, in one of her books, categorically stated that the Caribbean front, our melting pot of races, and for the people of Afro descent, we continue to struggle to find that balance. Remember, two people getting married in a church thing and all of that, that was very Eurocentric. When the slaves converted to the Eurocentric religions, that's when it was frowned upon in terms of, living together, cohabiting, and so on. But remember, the African cultures, and I use it broadly because we came from several parts of Africa. If you understand West African cultures, just look at the Akan, the Yoruba, and so on. Marriage was a whole feast. It was many days. It was many things happening. So if you get displaced culturally, then psychologically, of course, it becomes difficult to understand and find, a common footing. Now, with the influx of social media and all of those intra-internet different things, we have not just our children, but our parents being influenced by influencers online. You have people who are sitting there making millions and billions just by an opinion, how they cook a meal, how they redo their bathroom, how they decorate their kitchen. What does that have to do with the conversation here of missing teens? Everything. Because if your core values are not solidified, instilled, passed on, right, held down and properly implemented, then we have that nomadic behavior where there's wandering, right? And the wandering, of course, I gave, some typical push and pull factors, we call them. What would pull you out of your home? What would push you out of your home? The home is no longer that safe place it used to be. Now the perpetrator lives in the home. It can be a grandfather, it can be an uncle, it can be an aunt. And Mr. Ferguson can bear me out. It was only in 2012 there was a law passed to start charging women for sexual assault of boys. The law has always been charging men for sexual assault of girls. So when we have all of these missing links, we have a law, what, 1885? Listen, St. Joseph's Convent was started 1875. So you mean 10 years after convent started, we had this lunacy kind of act, and we still have it in 2024? So, Mr. Greenwich, here is the problem. Legislatively, culturally, right? Internally, we have a lot of work to do because we've had a history that predisposes us to violence. Transatlantic slavery was a violent thing. It was violence against Black people. It was violence against our families. And it continued to be violent. I am a proponent of my history as an empowered, proud Black woman. So I'm not going to go on any program and not say that, because that's how we started, with that violence and what you call institutionalized racism and assaults to begin with. And some people are not there yet. Hence the reason you have people like me in my profession, you know, as a clinical psychologist, because I have to reframe, restructure, redo minds because of those experiences. So some of our children are in homes with parents who are not very much educated on who they are. So they cannot parent. They don't understand their roles, their responsibilities. And then again, even though people can't love each other, they must understand that they must parent, even though they fall out of love. When you go to legal aid and you hear those cases, women say, I have to sleep with him for you to mind your child. Huh? When you hear those narratives, what does that tell the child? I'm worth nothing. My value is zero. So the one person who can come up to a girl and tell her you're beautiful, you know, they can get anything from her because they have validated her in such a deep place that even if it means breaking some fundamental rules or morals, she would go. Why? Because the love, the care, and the building of values from the core did not occur in the home. And I'll stop there for now.
You know,
Very
Ms.
good.
Cuffie,
Yeah,
very well
yeah,
said.
yeah,
You know, from a
yeah, yeah.
clinical psychologist perspective, some of the sentiments that I do share, that we haven't even started the process of healing the damage, the psychological damage, especially with regards to family structure and the dynamics. We haven't even started a conversation. You know, so I
Yep,
appreciate
yep.
you know, having bringing that and putting it into context. I would love to bring in Mr. Ferguson here from that
Yes.
standpoint, because from a legal perspective,
Yes.
I
In
know that the
fact,
courts have some. Oh, go
right.
ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, you can go ahead
Yeah,
with
go
the
on.
question. I was
Okay.
just
Oh,
about to
okay.
make a comment on you can ask the question and I can make a comment after too. So you can go
Okay.
ahead
No problem. No
with the
problem. Right.
question. You're asking a
Oh,
specific question.
yes. So from a legal standpoint, I know that the courts, you know, is constantly being challenged with regards to, you know, family matters, because from my knowledge, currently we don't have a court designated for family issues. I'm just hoping I have that correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yes, there
Right.
is no specific family court. So, for example, all the magistrates' courts, they have the family, a specialized family court. And well, that's one of the issues under discussion regionally. The Antigua, for example, established its family court in 2022, I believe. There was a pilot project in Antigua establishing a dedicated family court in which all family matters will be dealt with in that court, including divorces. in St. Vincent, there is a dedicated family court. In Grenada and in most of the other countries, you have the magistrates court dealing with family days, dealing with juvenile days. So a special day for juveniles, and you have a special day. And family matters here, a lot of it, one, will deal with domestic violence. So domestic violence matters are held in camera. In other words, the public is not allowed. We have a Domestic Violence Act, and if someone alleges that he or she is the victim of domestic violence, then you can go to court for what is called a protection order. And that protection order excludes, and usually it's the men, a party, the party on the other side who is alleged to be the abuser from the home it can be up to 3 years. The court has that power. Then you have, more importantly, when I say more importantly in relation to teenagers, because you have the question of maintenance of children and you have the question of custody of children, and those matters are dealt with. You have days, special days during the month to deal with matters of custody and maintenance. And I'm very happy that Miss Cuffie has really put several things in context, and even the issue, for example, our history and the history of the transatlantic slavery and the impact it has upon us, and the fact that slavery was only officially abolished, so to speak, in not too long ago. That was in 1838, and slaves were basically considered as things.
As property.
Not humans, but just like a commodity that can be bought and sold. You had slaves being sold off, and that was the law. That was the law not too long ago. So the impact that has had on our people up to this day is a factor that needs to be taken into consideration when we devise plans and programs and policies and legislation to deal with this issue. One of the comments, well, I think the starting point is really proper data and statistics. We are all speaking here, certainly I can speak for myself, very subjectively. You hear about missing teenagers. Is it a serious problem? Has it grown worse? Was it worse than 2000? Was it worse than 5 years ago? Is this year, or is it 2023 worse than 2022? It's important when we have discussions like these to have statistics, and not just statistics, but stories behind the statistics. So, for example, most of these missing teenagers, quote unquote, found after some time. And for the reasons, I wouldn't go back over the reasons stated by me. They have run away from an abusive situation at home, or they might find that care and love that they long for outside of the home. There may be issues of poverty and so, and others step forward, take advantage of it, and use these teenagers and the children. But we need statistics to properly guide discussions like these as to why. So, for example, how many missing teens were there in 2023? And out of these missing teens, how many of them voluntarily or on their own free will left the house without saying anything to go by some individual? How many of them were forced to run away from the home because of an abusive situation? How many of them were kidnapped or not going quote unquote voluntarily now or on their own free will, but forced to or taken away forcefully or by coercion to go somewhere else. Until we have those statistics that will guide these discussions scientifically, then we would not necessarily be getting to the bottom of the problem. Because now, missing children was always an issue for various reasons. We have to bear in mind that now we have the internet, the information superhighway, so you have more reporting and more sensitivity in relation to missing children. When somebody is missing, now the whole world knows instantly because we have an internet. Before, it might be just people in the community that might know anything at all, or people in the immediate family. But the nature of information has changed, and therefore we have to be careful when we are guiding and shaping policies that we understand the root problems or the root issues that lead to certain behavior. And so that is one aspect of it. We touched on the mental health aspect of it, but very importantly, again, sometimes these children, the worst things are said about these children, but you have serious issues among parents, issues of divorce, issues of separation, where then children become pawns in that power game. Children are used, so for example, if one party has custody of the child, then the other party is not going to maintain that child or give any money for maintenance because they feel and express sometimes very openly that, and in the case of women especially, that the man feels that the woman will take the money and do things other than take care of the child. The law imposes a duty on all parents to maintain children. It's a legal duty for which there are adverse consequences if that is not done. And therefore, when a court looks at issues between parents, whether parents separating as a result of a divorce or parties in a relationship and breaking up, what the court looks at is the best interest of the child. That's the critical question. What is in the best interest of the child? Not what is in the best interest of the parent, or what would the parents want to see, or a particular parent, but what is in the best interest of the child. And if sometimes the best interest of the child is taking that child and putting that child into the care and custody of a third party or some institution, then the court just does just that. And that's why you need public sensitization, because the internal politics among parents, where people feel that they can, well, not deliberately intending to harm the child, because everybody professes that they love the child so much, but not wanting to maintain, or you might have battles over custody. And as Ms. Cuffie rightly said, that you have the child living in different houses over an extended period of time. And not only that, but when they go to one house, the parent in one house bad dog the other parent, and vice versa. So you have situations where, you know, children grow up with this internal anger and the feeling of, at times, abandonment, even by their own parents. And again, parents many times are not even sensitive to that. And that is why the work as what you do with programs like these, and the work of other NGOs in society, become so critical when we are addressing these kinds of problems?
Okay. I don't know if I could come in here, right? Because Mr. Ferguson, you made some points there. Also, Miss Cuffie, that speaks to some of the things that really bothers me a lot. Because one of the things I recognize is that, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's not just in the context of missing children, but I think as a whole, as a country, I think we do not capture enough data, right? Do enough research, right? To make sure that we can find the root problems of some of the issues we are facing. So then when we speak of issues of, for instance, divorce, as you alluded to, or you, Ms. Coffee, alluded to, I would think, right, that the breaking up of a family could be a traumatizing issue for a child. Very traumatizing. Because children, they love their daddies for whatever reason, they love their mummies for a different reason. I don't think we can't say they have favorites, but they love and I don't know if there's any actual data that can go and research to say, okay, that we have checked to see that most of the teenagers that go missing, do they come from single parent households? Do they come from households that are extended family? Which I think it's now it's becoming more and more a thing of the past, the extended family, right? So I think that is important, because if we are able to understand, okay, that out of 100 missing teens, right, 80% of that are from single parent households, then we can shine a spotlight on why is that the case. What are the conditions in those single parent households, right? As you alluded to, is there problems with child maintenance? Is there problems with conflict and disputes with regards to, um, I was speaking to somebody some time ago, and I realized sometimes I think because of society has it that mothers are the default parent in times of dispute, right? Even that could be a question that needs to be bring to the fore, right? Why is it that, okay, automatically, generally, a mother ends up custody of the child just by that mere reason that she brought the child into this world, right? So I'm not saying that there isn't any study to show that the mothers make better parents, so that's our fathers or whatever the case may be. But I'm just saying that if we're able to capture data and do the necessary research, then we can make more calculated decisions and better policy decisions as to that of the family and that of our children. Because we could speak, I'm a advocate for family, because I think too often we always speak to that of all the ills in society and this is happening and that happening. But I think if you really track back most of the things, the nucleus of it is in the family and in the home, right? Because if you do not instill values in a child, right, a child would be what it's like with everything else. If you put a child to grow up with monkeys, he would behave like a monkey. You understand? So at the end of the day, we have to inculcate those values into our child. I could tell you as a man that grew up in a extended family type with my mother, aunt, uncle. I was one of the guys that was fighting my mother, and I would fight my mother. I think I know better than she does, right? But what I can say to you is that my mother is what you would consider a a woman that was, as you just, Miss Coffee says, a strong woman that did her duty as a mother. She made the necessary sacrifices, right? And whether wrongly or rightly so, right? I think there are things that needs to be looked at in the system, because I have heard utterances and I've heard stories that men that want to take care of their children as well. But it would be remiss of me if I don't say that I see many a times that children are left undone. Right? They live with their mothers, but when you see the mother have the best of everything. Right? So you have fathers that have those issues. So even that as an issue, maybe we can look at from a court perspective. I think one of the things that they could do is that maybe in even paying child support, right? Maybe developing a card, right? That is low, that the finances is loaded to. That, for instance, I think that a lot of men may have more comfort in thinking, okay, that yes, we put this money on this card, right? And this card cannot be used for A, B, C, or D. It has to be used for stuff pertaining to the child. You understand? So I think some of these things, as I said, I've pointed out quite a couple of things, but I think through proper data collection, I think we could get to the meat of the matter, because ultimately, I think the problem stems from the home, whether it is being whatever the problem may be, right? Because there could be a number of issues, right? Could be mental health, could be all these things. But I still would think the mental health comes from a lot of the trauma, because, as I said, two parents splitting up, I think could be very traumatic on their own. And I think too, in closing, I want to say that I think because of social media and this new trends these days, I think we glorify a lot of things that we should not be glorifying, right? So, for instance, I think we glorify single motherhood, which I think is something that should not be glorified. And I think too often divorce should be a last resort, because at the end of the day, research has shown that two parents being in a household is better than one, right? So I think all of these things need to be taken into consideration, and I understand even from Mr. Ferguson could speak to that. That I think I don't know how you could go about changing that, but I just think it's just too easy to, from where I sit, because, and as I said, I don't have data to back this up, but just from social observable data, me seeing too often, every time you turn, you hear somebody getting divorced.
All right.
And yeah,
Monty, I think we should allow
yeah,
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 Mr. Ferguson probably to respond, and maybe Ms. Cuffie, you could chime in
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
All right. Well, just listening to a lot of what you're saying, Monty. Society has changed. Women are no longer living in the dark ages, and men are no longer either. So, saying it's too easy to get a divorce, that infringes on somebody's inalienable rights, your human right to stay married or be married. What I would prefer to be said or to be looked at is people do not enter marriage lightly, right? I would prefer
Fair
for
enough.
us to look at it that way, because I am divorced, right? I am divorced, and I don't think I was the petitioner, and I don't think anybody has a right to discuss, to defray, or to say how or why, right? My status has taken place. So that's very private, personal, and
Mhm.
it deals with the person in the situation, because many times we put pressure on people to stay married, and that pressure brings them into mental health dysfunction. It creates even more dysfunction in the families, because from where I sit, there are more dysfunctional married people and nuclear families than there are single parent families. I can say that, right? Because some people are big on the appearances, women and men, big on attachments. If I'm not attached to this person, then I'm not complete. And that's too can be passed on to the children. So I think our narrative needs to change in terms of who am I as a person? What do I bring to the table? And if things change, what am I going to do? Because when things change, you cannot become bitter. You cannot become a whole ogre, I've had situations and cases where, men found out through DNA that a child they were mining for 9 years wasn't theirs. And they were bringing grocery and telling the children, don't give him. He's not mine anymore. I've had that. I've had children go and lie down by the river for 2 nights because they didn't want to be in the home again because who they thought was their daddy wasn't their daddy. I've sat in offices with principals and here DNA is read, and young children as young as grade 2 had to find out this man I've called daddy is no longer my daddy, and mothers had to be humiliated. But thank God there are professionals like me who can meander my way through those things, right? So we are very blessed in Grenada that we just don't have, 1 or 2 professions to deal with the problem. But I think what it comes down to, fathers and Mr. KC, it comes down to the individual. Learning who you are, learning what's right for you, and learning what your roles are, even if situations change. Even if situations change. Like you said, Monty, you have some mommies that they look like the atom of a peacock. Everything on fleek. And when you look at the children, you're not throwing halfpenny their way. I've seen it because, I work in the school system. And that child is on every program there is because why? Poverty sometimes look like it's not poverty, but it is poverty because poverty of mind is the worst poverty. So in looking at redressing a lot of these things, I want to start and throw out there the concept of self. The concept of self. You see, self-awareness. You see, dealing with you, sitting with you, analyzing you, loving you, discovering you. That is great. Because then people would not be pressured to just have babies because I have a womb or I have some sperm that I need to shoot off, right? And this program says father knows best because a father is not just a man. A father is a man who understands that the father's role is to provide, profess, and protect. And then a mother must understand her role too. So if we have 2 derailed people who are derailed and who are disenfranchised and disenchanted, therein lies the challenge with how they parent. Yes, therein lies the challenge with how they parent.
Okay. I think I wanted to bring in Mr. Ferguson here, and thank you, Ms.
Probably
Curtis, for that.
Again, can comment on especially the last part of Ms. Cuffie's presentation, that issue of concept of self, and it all comes down to the individual self-awareness. While I believe, and again, I believe that is important, but I think what is more important, what is more important for society is really having and creating strong institutions to achieve just that. Because, for example, if you have 2 warring parents, it is hardly likely that any of them among themselves can create a truce. Or you might have a temporary truce, and the war begins again because somebody does something that the other does not like. And in all of this, the child suffers. So while it's important to empower people, I think it is extremely critical that we develop these strong institutions, one, and we develop appropriate policies and legislative support for what we want to see ultimately happen. So, for example, there is best practice out there. Grenada ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. That's a 1989 convention. And Grenada is monitored, has to report on developments that take place with regard to the care and protection of children. And so we have legislation. We have a Child Protection Act. We have a Child Protection Authority that is empowered to deal with certain particular situations. We have social services, a department or Ministry of Social Services. We have probation officers out there. We have under the Education Act, formerly known as truancy officers. We have school attendance officers to ensure that children of compulsory school age, that's, I believe it's 5 to 16 under the Act, that they actually go to school. And Ms. Cuffie made a point earlier too, that while we sometimes focus on the female, because I think you have more problems facing females than males, but you also have instances of males being exploited. And there was reference to the 2012 amendments to the Criminal Code. We had some amendments there that significantly increased the punishment for child-related offenses, sexual offenses. They were significantly increased. But also, too, we had the character of some of these offenses changing. So you might have, you had then, pre the changes in the legislation in 2012, you had the offense of defilement of a female. And so you have a situation where it's defilement, yes, and it's of a female. So if there's a defilement or some offense regarding a male, nobody can be charged for that because the character of the offense addresses the female. That was changed to having sex with a minor. And there was a female charge post that legislation where there was a 15-year-old boy and supposed to have been a missing boy too. And it turned out he was with this adult, at the time. And so that female was charged at the time. I don't comment on the outcome, but I'm just saying as a starting point, the law opens up and reflects the changes in society, the evolving society, and you amend the law to suit. So now you have more, gender neutral expressions there where whether it's exploitation of the male or female, it can be adequately covered. Now we have, and again, when I speak of institutions, I remember there was a study done, it was back in the late 1990s, in the 1990s, and I was involved in it, Youth and Conflict with the Law. And it covered young people, teenagers, I believe it was up to the age of 21, young offenders. And Mr. Greenwich was making the point earlier on in referring to the importance of data and statistics, that you need to know direct you to the root cause.
Okay, I think he's a bit frozen there.
Then
Yes.
was age 12 prisoners. And when the question at the end of the study, basically, some of the findings is that one, young people who did not go on to secondary school had the greater chance of ending up in Richmond Hill Prison, because there was a direct relationship with people dropping out of school and crime. People of young people with single parents, and I'm just speaking about the results of the study, it showed that most of them came from single parents. Most of them dropped out of school very early. Most of them came from a background of poverty. So you have these social conditions that affect the shaping of our children, and ultimately can lead to the path of crime. And if we don't have strong institutions, because Ms. Cuffie might be working real hard 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, but as an individual can make a big difference, but cannot do it alone. Even a collection of individuals doing it separately. But if we create the institutions, like, for example, now, out of that study, out of studies on crime and people, young people associating with adults in prisons, and you may have repeat offenders, and people come out there basically learning how to execute criminal offenses more expertly. So that's not what you want. You want rehabilitation. And out of all of this grew the juvenile center, presently in St. David's, St. Andrews. There you have a juvenile center where juveniles who come into conflict with the law and who need to be institutionalized, albeit for a short period of time, they're going there so that they can actually get guidance, not locked away and be punished, but the locking away is the punishment. When they get there, there are programs of rehabilitation. So it's the same thing we need for the prisons. It's the same thing we need for the juvenile center. Many of the issues that relate to domestic violence come out of situations where people lack skills in conflict management. So they only know one way to do it, and that is to lash out. They end up in court, and all commendations to the Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic. And that's an NGO where there was an anger management program done by the Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic. And at first, many men were reluctant to be part of the program. But you know what? Part of the approach was, listen, you either do it or you choose. And sometimes the choice is imprisonment. The choice is imprisonment. And of course, people will choose to go and do anger management. And you know the reports that after a while, people actually enjoy the programs. People who are reluctant to go there at first, they spoke so highly and positively about the program because it had a positive impact on them. So we need these institutions, and I'm not just speaking about governmental institutions, but NGOs, as I mentioned, these NGOs like Grand Coda and Art and different NGOs dealing in the community. These folks play such a critical role because they are always in direct contact with people. Yeah. Indirect contact with people, and you have policies and programs, and the whole thing is organized. So when somebody it has, then the whole thing don't fall down because you have an institutional structure that is there. And without the legislative and policy support is a problem. Like I said, mental health is a classic. Look how we deal with mental patients. We wait until they reach a point where something happens and they get violent. The police, who are not necessarily trained to deal with them, they have to come to deal with the situation. And most times you hear somebody gets shot and killed or shot and seriously injured. The new mental health legislation that I was talking about, that was in place and a draft in place, and every opportunity I get to speak about it, I say it. Because we have a serious problem. There is legislation lying somewhere after consultations throughout the country more than 12 years ago, and it has not moved from point A to point B. And if our laws refer to people as lunatics in 2024, how do we expect the man in the street to see these same people not as lunatics? Because that's the language that our law speaks. And that's why there's urgent need for law reform in the country. So, there are a number of things. And so whilst I agree with the thrust of the comment, that we need to work on people, we need to empower people, we need to change people, we need to that whole sense of dignity and so, all of that is important. But we need to instill instill that skill, conflict management. Because sometimes you hear somebody have done so many matters and just unbelievable. What was the issue? What was the issue that created it? And why? The absence of conflict management skills or anger management skills. So a man, there's a dispute over a bowl of fish broth, and a man ends up dead. Yeah. There's a dispute, there's an issue over $5, and a policeman ends up dead. A man accidentally mashes another, and somebody ends up dead. So you have these issues, and there's this new concept that I think all leaders need to get exposed to. And I'm sure Ms. Cuffie in her area, clinical psychology, will be very familiar with it, but this concept of emotional intelligence, the big thing that people speak about that all leaders should understand, and to be, sensitive to the issues facing people, to the problems facing people. And then, when you take decisions with the desire to change positively, that desire for positive change. And if you have emotional intelligence, if we have good conflict management skills, and it should start in schools. It shouldn't start when people become, long after people become members of organization in their old age, right? And then they are faced with these things and don't know what to do. People at the level of the schools, they should be dealing with anger management and dealing with conflict management skills. And you will see what a better society that we can ultimately have.
So one of the things I want to harp in on in my humble area of expertise is the fact that every self-regulated skill starts with self-awareness. Before you can go on to do strategies in anger management, strategies in conflict resolution, strategies in communication skills, all those things. The very first, what you call the ground stone, right? Work is self-concept. That's how we work. That's how we do it. All of those skills that you've put forward, Mr. Ruggles, all those skills are pertinent, but they're built upon the self-concept. That's how psychology works with it. In addition to that, our guidance curriculum in the schools take care of all of that. Under Franca Bernardine, many years ago, there was a little booklet done on anger management, and we did a whole curriculum on personal development, right? I am one of the authors of that. We continue to use it in the guidance curriculum. What I want to applaud is that recommendation of institutions that need to be on the ball, started, funded, running well, in order that all the things we do not just fall down. So it's like you make porridge, and when time to eat it, you have no container to put it. You have nothing to put it in. And I totally agree with you 100%. This is the problem. This is the problem. So take, for example, we don't have a national counseling center. We don't. And it's not everybody who has some mental health challenges must go to Monge. There are steps and stages. Some people are psychologically challenged to the point where it gets clinical, and clinical goes over to psychiatric, because there's a fine line between clinical and psychiatry. No, psychiatry is medicine. So when it becomes a psychiatric problem, right, there are some children I have to refer to the child psychiatrist. I know when I have to do that because I'm trained in this field. I'm a professional in this field. So it's not every child who is assessed with a psychological problem has to see a child psychiatrist. No, we know when the referral has to take place. But you are so right, Mr. Ruggles. At the same time, after that, where do they go? What institution is there to help them with all of the great things that we're teaching them? Who is there to help their families? Because as the children are being taught, guided, counseled, and experienced in the therapy, the parents must go through something too.
Yes.
Because these children have to go back to that same home. So, like I'm saying, 1,000% on that. I have been advocating that for years. Years. You sending my children to the same place that abuse them, hurt them.
Well, actually, too.
And it cannot work.
In that mental health legislation, yes, you know, just I was so taken aback because I was involved in the, as I said, consultations, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So Monge was like a place where people went to live. It was not an institution where you would be treated in a sense. It's like you are abandoned by your family, and then so you have people in a mental institution who virtually living there for 30 and 40 years. They go in there and it becomes their home. Just imagine if somebody goes into the general hospital and the next 20 years you're in the hospital still. In the hospital, actually living in the hospital. Because that is what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a place where you go and you get treated. And then you can go out in the community and you can get treated in the community. So under the new proposed Primary Health Act
Right.
of 12, 13 years ago, the focus was on primary health care. So, for example, you can build a database of individuals in the community who had challenges. And whatever they had to get, whether it's medication or whatever, you monitor them over a period of time. And once they start to exhibit certain behaviors, then you know you have to move in. You don't wait until that person kills somebody or damages somebody badly, and then that person who is ill gets then shot in return. So and that's where and even when speaking about institutions, because in a sense, Ms. Cuffie, you're part of an institution because your department has seen it fit to have clinical psychologists operating at a particular level there because of the importance of that area. And I always say we need more training in that field. We need more people in that field. We need more people to do counseling. It's all part of that institutional structure where just as you go to school or you go a workplace, there are structures in place, then you can move from point A to point B. So even you spoke about people and mental institutions, but take, for example, the prisons. There are excellent rehabilitation programs in the prison.
Oh, yes.
But at some point, people will be released. And people, again, if the people outside view the prisoners in a particular way, then they won't get jobs. They won't get people call them names. And then out of frustration, they might get into the same behavior that they actually have changed in the prison, come out with. And you need that structure. In fact, St. Kitts just introduce or they plan to introduce a program that will enhance greater access to justice, but is a broader program that will also look at people coming from prison and be able to get some institutional help. That transition period from prison life to regular life outside.
Civil society.
Precisely. So those are the kinds of institutions, you know, that I'm thinking that I speak about, and the importance of legislation. And just to use one example, you know, when there was talk about doing away with plastic bags, so there'll be this ban on importing plastic bags, and people will have to go to the supermarket. Many were wondering, well, listen, how will you do without plastic bags? That's what people living with over all these years. You go in the grocery, you put your thing in your plastic bag, and you might use the plastic bag for something else.
Right.
But you know, the policy was put in place, and eventually everybody just followed.
Yeah.
Right? Move, and now everybody have their bag and they're going to the supermarket. And for me, especially in other countries that you go, and you realize, you know, they're not at that level yet, that we are really far ahead. We have a lot to commend ourselves for. Sometimes we are very hard on ourselves. But the point is, and that's what I'm talking about, putting policies in place. So something like plastic bags that we all grew up with, and you feel plastic bags are so necessary and indispensable for shopping. But once the policy in place, the legislation in place, no plastic bags. Just so. The court itself moved from very adversarial exclusively. When you go and fight with a man, you're going to court. That's the ultimate fight. And you know what? The court introduced itself mediation while the matter is in court. And mediation seeks now to have the individuals, with the assistance of a trained mediator, that they sit and engage and try to solve their own problem. And the agreement they come up with eventually becomes the order of the court. So even without the court trying the matter, it's just as if the court had a trial and came up with that same order. And that is because the court changed its rules to move to alternative dispute resolution, even though the court is associated with adversarial conflict and one side versus the other side. But just that change, and you have had a significant difference, even with backlogs and even with how people relate to each other. And all of this has a wider impact on wider society.
Let me just ask a question, because I like to be able to speak to that of the layman, right? And I listened to this conversation, which is a very pertinent conversation about institutions, right? And I would like to really speak to that, and maybe I'm just not, might be misinformed, right? And we speak into that of institutions to deal with all of these ills of society, whether it's mental health, whether it's persons in the home that has disrupted in the home and people running away, all these different things, right? I want to bring it right back here to the family, and you may find that I always come back to the family, right? Because whether we want to accept or not, the family is the first institution, right? And I need to maybe I need to be educated on what agency or what institution is there in place to build strong family values and strong family structures. Because a lot of what we're speaking about is symptoms of bad, or maybe I don't want to use the term bad, but family structures and lack of family structure, lack of family values, you know, a lot of these. So we're speaking about symptoms, right? So what I'm saying is that where is the institution that deals with strengthening the family, right? I keep coming back to this because at the end of the day, if you fix, and I want to use the word fix loosely, loosely, from is the age-old question: what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? If you fix that problem from that first institution, which is a family, a lot of the problems that we're discussing, right, now becomes a foregone conclusion, right? It's no longer a big problem that we have to have all these different institutions to deal with these symptoms now, because these institutions have to be created to deal with symptoms of problems. So my thing is that what is the agency? What is the institution that speaks to that of the family and building strong families and solving the problem? And that is where it comes back to what I talk about. If we're doing research on whether single parent, whether it's extended or whatever it is, or whether it's a combination of all of them, that might be the best fix moving forward.
All right. So because we have to wrap up in 7 minutes, I'm going to be short, brief, succinct, right?
Yeah.
We have a number of institutions who have the mandate, and the mandate was not given by anybody per se. So if you look at the schools do a very great job in working with family. Just the idea of PTA, Parent Teachers Association, is not just to build a strong, academically bright student, but is family. Okay, a lot of the events and so are family oriented. Just the curriculum, health and family life education. Think about it, guidance curriculum. All those things point to building strong families. Then again, we have the churches, we have the mosque, we have the HQ. I don't want to leave out anybody. We have we have, what do spiritual Baptists have? We have all of those areas, the religious houses of expression, right? They build strong families. You made the point about, the people of the Islamic faith, how the students really hardly have to come into the office to be disciplined and so, right? Because they deal with it on a religious front, they handle it. So religion again plays a very important role, right? Um, then, of course, we have the Ministry of Social Development. The Ministry of Social Development has a very important program called the Spicy Parent Program. The parenting program there is top of the line. I have been one of the trainers years ago when people actually got their UE certificate and was going around the island doing parenting training. If you notice, every carnival time, there's a little pamphlet called Spicy Parent. Yes, they run radio programs and so. Mr. Ruggles spoke about legal aid and counseling clinic. You see, if you build the men who are supposed to be the head of the household, right, in this patriarchal society, if your religious persuasion is Christology, right, or even if it's Judaism and Islam, you believe that the men are the heads. And with that being said, if you had the man-to-man program in legal aid and counseling clinic, right, and you have some other programs around the island where some CBAs and NGOs, particularly look out for families. The only thing is, these things must be solidified. So you see how you have, when you go for an OAS scholarship, there's a consortium of universities that the OAS would work with in order to deliver the scholarships through them. I just feel we need to have a consortium. I don't want to use the word institutions. I want to say organizations, so that we know that these are the ones tailored to and working with and for, right? The strengthening of, the enrichment of, right? The therapeutically care of families. And just to end, in terms of, what's the reason for the abundance of missing persons reports on Facebook? And so we've delved into the law, the psychology, the sociological pieces, and so as to why. And I just want to humbly submit the last part of it. Being our brother's keeper is very important. If I see Mr. Campbell and his family struggling in an area, and I can meet that need, maybe I should meet that need and not wait till it gets to the point where Mr. Campbell decided taking his clothes in a pillowcase and run off somewhere or try to commit suicide. We have a lot of young people now, and I have the data because I collect my data in my practice, right? Okay. You have a lot of people under age 21 who have severe suicide ideations. They have the plan. They know when they're going to do it. And with the execution of that, we've seen that happen within the last year. And one of the things, I encourage not just young people, but adults to do not make statements like, you're not stressed, what you want to die for, Mm-hmm. How could you be depressed? What are you depressed about? Things like that. That narrative, that salvo is very mean. It's very insensitive. It also is a violent way. Violence is not just about knife and so. In psychology, violence for us is how you portray something to anyone that infringes on their human right to the way where they feel as though I no longer am valued as a human being. We as a people, Grenadians, we have a language of violence. Call your so and so. Move your mother this. This is the language. Parents use it with their children. People transact that way. So transactional analysis, that aspect of psychology I want to finalize with. The cultural transactional analysis is very poor with some of us.
Okay.
And when we take the higher ground in being intellectual and being loving and caring, people say, "What are you trying? What are you? That ain't gonna work." That's American way of doing things. And we have to flip the narrative. So in order for people to feel comfortable by saying, listen, this is going on in my home. I'm 15. I can't do anything much. I've tried. I don't want to be there anymore. And we can hear that. know what steps to tell them to take and move forward, then we'll continue to see the missing persons, right?
Thank
So
you.
I want to humbly submit that we just move through with being more caring, more loving, and more open to hearing from others so that they're free to talk and free to share.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cuffie. And as we look to wrap up and some of this conversation, I would just like to take it over to Mr. Ferguson. And in your closing comments, I'd just like to refer to one thing that the Chief Justice, the Janice Pereira, in her speech for the opening of the law year, she urged that social work agencies offer interventions to focus on anger management, most importantly, parent support, conflict resolution, and mentorship. So in your conclusive statement, I would like you to explain how the current relationship with the social service agencies can be enhanced to support the court and its mandate.
Yes. Well, first of all, let me say that no one institution can solve the problem. It takes a multifaceted approach. So, for example, when children come to court, you have issues concerned with children. You have representatives of the Child Protection Authority there. You have folks from social services. You may have folks from the juvenile center, depending on the nature of the problem. And what the court tries to do is to work with these agencies and even, deal with therapy depending on what the problem is. And then you have these people reporting to the court. So they form an integral part of the court's work. Mediators, for example, you have court-connected mediators, those who are recognized by the court to mediate in court matters. And these mediators, the majority of them are not lawyers. They are managers, economists, civil engineers, different professions, but they have been trained, and their training is mediation. So that is, they are not lawyers, they are not judges, but they play an integral role in disposing of matters before the court and disposing of them in an amicable way as possible. So to complement the court's work, you need the support of social services. You need the support of the probation department. You need the support of clinical psychologists. You need the support of so many different institutions if you want to see the results. So, for example, magistrates complain at times. Listen, this person comes to court, they obviously have a mental problem. They obviously have a mental problem. You can't just send that person up to prison, and prison is not the right place for somebody who has a mental problem. You have now identifying that problem, because that person can create wider and deeper problems. So you find a way. And when you find a way, that's working with other institutions, the social services people, and they report back to the court. So the court's work can never be effective. The court is not just about judges and magistrates and lawyers.
Right.
It's important that the court works with these institutions. So, for example, in the prisons, you have people who deal with rehabilitation, the rehabilitation department, and a part and parcel of sentencing. When you sentencing, you take into account, the prospects of rehabilitation of that person, and especially when you're dealing with young people. Before you sentence in a court, you have reports from either probation officers or the experts from the social services department, where they go in the community, they ask questions, they speak to family, and then they submit a report to the court. So it's a multifaceted approach that needs to be taken, whether you're dealing with criminal matters in the court or civil matters. And I think that is what the Chief Justice distrusts, because the court system does not have the capacity to try all these matters and take a decision on them. The prisons, we wouldn't have, the prisons already overcrowded. But you can't be building a prison in every parish because you're sending everybody to jail, right? You need to be able to deal with these problems, right, and monitor them over a period of time, so you know who ends up going to prison or who gets some alternative program to follow outside, and you have the reports to the court, ultimately. So it's not just any one institution believing that it could solve all these problems. The schools can't solve it all. The parents, and it goes back to a point Mr. Greenwich made, the parents can't solve it all. Because I think, very importantly, you say, we deal with parenting. Many people like to say, make the point that before, it takes a community to raise a child. So the community itself plays a critical role in quote unquote parenting that child. And just having in communities, and when we speak about institutions, I speak very broadly. So in some before, you used to have all these athletic clubs, vibrant clubs. In town you had you would have handball, and not just for football or so, but with the seniors having a critical role to play. A club structure where young people can go learn discipline, learn sportsmanship, right? All of that, the parents can't teach that. That is limited. You need these institutions, as I refer to them. Look at the great example Kirani James has been. How he has, lifted himself and community and country and Caribbean, just about everybody, by being focused and being part of a club structure in a community. I'm sure it didn't depend all on his parents. So even when we talk about parenting, and there are specific rules for the narrow definition of parents and parenting, but there are also very broader roles that the community plays in what we will see as good parenting. So, and that is why you have all these, retirees. Our concept in the Caribbean, as I always say, when you have a man retire, that's to just go home and sit down because you work already, retire now. But these are people, invaluable resources with experience and expertise that we can tap into in our various communities, whether, teaching, lecturing, giving talks, but we don't do that. So I suppose we can go on, but I see time is against us.
But no, I think I think and that these types of conversations, you can't just have those in 1 hour, and that's the constraint. But I think both our guests here this evening have really put into perspective the issue, and also solutions have been provided, and I really appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedule to appear on this program. To Mr. Ferguson and to Mrs. Cuffie, I would like to wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you for your contribution, and I hope that you will be, willing to come back on another program.
Colin.
Yes, tell me.
So I just want to take the opportunity here to say a special thanks to Miss Ferguson and to Mr. Ferguson
Don't worry, you're
And
excused. Move on.
yes.
Getting on the program,
Like I just remarried.
Yes, yes,
yes,
yes.
yes. So I just want to say thanks to both of you for coming on and
You're
making
welcome.
very valuable contributions. And I
You're
want to
welcome.
give this thank you on behalf of the Anglican High School PTA executive and by extension our newly formed Fathers Association. Right,
Wow.
and I hope we can continue this conversation. And the fact that Ms. Cuffie saying, well, I guess you didn't know we started a Fathers Association and maybe we
No,
could
I
reach out.
didn't.
Yes, so we could
I
reach
love
out
it.
and maybe, yes, so we could continue to have this conversation and you too, Mr. Ruggles, so that we could go from strength to strength. And as Colin said, we can't have this conversation in one taking. So
So true.
we definitely have to continue this. All right.
All right.
Thanks again.
Perfect. Well said.
Yes,
All right. So a special
yes. Well,
good
thank
evening.
you, and you're most welcome.
All
Yes.
right. All
Yes.
right.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.
Bye bye.
Okay.
Uh,
Things.